Welcome, everyone. We are here today to talk about the election. What's going to happen in November? What should we expect? What should give us comfort? What should the process look like? And what could possibly happen that might make it look a little unusual relative to what we're used to? So I'm Deb Lavoie, founder of Reality Team. We're here at the Talk on Main Street and on the Reality Team page. And today we're going to be talking with Claire Finkelstein, who is the Algernon Biddle Professor of Law and a Professor of Philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania. She is the director of the Center for Ethics and the Rule of Law. And I happen to know for a fact that she has been thinking about this issue quite a lot. One of the reasons I asked Claire to be part of this conversation is because, I follow elections pretty carefully. I follow the news and the politics pretty carefully. And the one thing I've kind of come to realize is I've never had to know how elections really work before. And so there are so many people saying so many things, some of them very, very troubling. And very few people really seem to understand how elections actually work, what should worry us, and what sort of systems there are for dealing with ambiguous outcomes. So Claire, how are you sort of thinking about November and thinking about how we're going into this election, what our situation is now? And I'll stop there. So where are we right now?
Well, first of all, Deb, thanks so much for having me. I'm delighted to be part of this project. And it's so important, the topics that you're discussing on a regular basis. We have with this election an absolutely unprecedented situation for our democracy. We have a president in the White House who has openly engaged with a foreign power, though he denies any collusion in the 2016 election. We do know that he has a close relationship with Vladimir Putin, and we do know that the Russians interfered in our election in 2016 to try to help get this man elected. Now he is in the White House, and he controls very much of the mechanisms surrounding our democracy, the guardrails on our democracy, which he has been trying to undermine in every possible way. That is one factor. Then we know, second of all, that we still have foreign powers, but particularly Russia, who continue to be interested in the US election and who continue to try to spread disinformation regarding the election. And as far as we know, Russia is still, as in 2016, very supportive of Donald Trump remaining in the White House. And then when you add to those two factors, the fact that we are in the middle of a global pandemic, and we have people who are afraid to go to the polls. We have, on top of that, people who are dying in large numbers. We have passed the 200,000 mark in this country, and there's no end in sight. So we are on track for an absolutely unprecedented election in our system, in which we may not be able to trust the outcome of the vote. We may not be aware of what the outcome is for a long time. And we have a president in the White House who may try to intercede to throw the election or get an outside body to declare the election in his favor, if indeed we even are able to discern the results after November 3rd.
So just to sort of level set where we are. So obviously, there's a lot of there are 100 things to worry about in what you just said, right? Like you could take any phrase within that, and it could raise a lot of concern. But normally, in most election years, right, we go to the polls, we vote, we come home, we sit down in front of the TV, and we watch the results come in. Or at least if you're a little bit nerdy like we are in our family, you know, my husband and I, every year since we were married, every election year since we were married, we would sit there in front of the TV with a map and like color them in and get really excited about that, right? It's not going to work that way this year. So talk to me a little bit about what, in terms of the mechanics of the election, in terms of the election process, how's it going to be different? And then let's talk about how it's resilient and not.
Well, Deb, I would say, first of all, you might be able to take out that map and color states in, but you're going to need an awful lot of purple because there may be states that you just don't know how to color in, and it might sit there, you know, put it on a table you're not using too often because it might go on for several weeks. So it's very possible that on November 3rd, we will come out of that evening or even the next morning and have no idea who is going to be the next president of the United States. And there were several reasons. Yeah, there are several reasons for this. First of all, we will have people trying to vote by mail, either mail-in ballots or absentee ballots in record numbers. People are afraid to go to the polls because of coronavirus, and there will be a very large uptick in the number of people trying to vote by mail. But then second of all, when are those mail-in ballots going to come in? As we have had reports of interference with the functioning, a deliberate slowdown in the functioning of the post office by Postmaster Louis DeJoy, who has been taking sorting machines offline. There were some reports of mailboxes being removed. Now, we're not clear whether or not those were deliberate interference with the mail function or whether or not that was routine maintenance. There were reports of mailboxes being locked. There are also reports and images of mail just actually being dumped and not delivered at all. There has been a federal court that ruled that that cannot be happening right now. How much adherence there is to that ruling, we don't know. So, but the point is that the post office has been in a state of slowdown now for a number of weeks. And we don't know when those mail-in ballots are going to be received. Now, how long can they be counted for? Well, that's a state-by-state matter. As we know, there was a big decision in Wisconsin with regard to the primaries that cut off when the votes could be counted by. The Democrats had requested that so long as the ballots were postmarked by election day that they could be counted, and the court said no.
But in other states, that is the case, right? So in some states,
as long as right, it's a state-by-state matter. So there will be different rules to be applied depending on the states, but it may be that for as much as 5 days to a week after the election, that depending on the rules of that state, that ballots are still being counted. So let's start with that. Now, you'll remember that in 2000, it came down to within 500 votes of deciding who was going to be the next president, Gore or Bush, and there was a recount going on in the state of Florida. And the Supreme Court ended up stepping in and halting the recount. And that threw the election to Bush. So in effect, in the last election, in the 2000 election, the Supreme Court decided who the next president of the United States was going to be. So now, to add to the trifecta of, it's President Donald Trump, who seems to respect no laws in the White House, it's the Russians trying to influence our elections, and we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Let's add another factor, which is that we just lost a Supreme Court justice. And so we have, at the moment, 8 sitting justices. Now, the president has made a nomination, and Amy Coney Barrett, who was a very, very controversial nominee. And the Senate, which had previously said they would not confirm Merrick Garland because Obama nominated Merrick Garland in the last year, 11 months before the election, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, had said, we will not go into Senate confirmation hearings on Obama's pick in the last year of his presidency, is now just, a little more than a month out from the election, is saying we will go ahead and consider Amy Coney Barrett. So this is a very inconsistent position that is occurring. There's going to be a pitched battle over that. It's enormously controversial, and she will be enormously controversial because her presence on the court will almost certainly mean the end of the historic abortion decision, Roe v. Wade. So we are poised for this absolute crisis. And you could add even a 5th factor here, which is there's been enormous civil unrest around the killing of African Americans by police officers. And so there has been a lot of conflict in the streets. We don't know whether or not that conflict is being partially instigated. For example, in Portland, where there are right-wing nationalists who are going in and instigating violence. And we heard the president in the debate the other night talk about needing to do something about Antifa. So it is really, you couldn't make it up. The number of factors that are playing in here, and there is a grave risk that we will not have a peaceful or smooth transition of power.
So let's talk. I kind of interested. There's this sort of event that happens, which is we go to the polls, we mail in our ballots are counted, right? But then the states pick the winner, right? So the states pick the winner, and they have to certify the results, or they don't pick the winner, but they certify the results of the election, and they need to do that by December 8th, right?
Right. And so the Electoral College, but of course we don't have a straight up or down majority vote. A lot of people think the Electoral College should be eliminated, but right now we still have an Electoral College. And so, one very complicated thing is that people vote for electors, and then the electors are pledged to support a certain candidate, but there is nothing necessarily holding them to that. So question whether or not—
There's some ruling about faithless electors, and that's not
right.
allowed.
So, one of the questions is whether or not Donald Trump could, in various ways, try to separate the electors from their committed choices and reassign the candidate to whom they are committed to vote. So it is, there are a lot of unknowns here. One of the things that we have learned with a vengeance is that the levers of our democracy, or rather the guardrails on our democracy, have been softer than we thought they were. They are not etched in stone. They are not, they do not come down to us from on high in canonical form. A lot of the things that have kept our democracy in place are intangible factors, traditions, general principles, things that we've always done, and so no one questions it. But when you have someone come in who suddenly is challenging the very system, even our debate system. Donald Trump was not willing to abide by the rules of the debate, despite the fact that these rules are hashed out between
Willing or not able? I don't know.
these rules are hashed out between the parties, and Donald Trump and Joe Biden both had to sign off on these rules, and those rules gave each individual a certain amount of time, and then one of the candidates is not willing to respect that time. Amazingly, the debate organizers did not have an enforcement mechanism. There was no method in place to make absolutely sure that that he was going to abide by the rules, for that both parties would abide by the rules. For example, they could have
Enforcement is a big
mics
deal.
that could
Right.
be turned off, right? And in fact, Chris Wallace, I think, should have requested that. But anyway, the point is that how do we expect that this president will respect the restrictions on the election and the law surrounding the election when we have clear evidence that he's not willing to abide by the rules surrounding even a debate leading up to that election?
So there's so many interesting things in what you just said. Interesting, worrisome. I want to go back for a second, though. You brought up the 2000 election and the Florida recount. So I remember that election. I remember the recount. I remember how weird it was and everyone was gasping.
Yeah,
But
how
I
was
don't
your math
remember.
then? Did you have lots of
Yeah, so it's a few years under the bridge, right? What was the basis for the court intervening in the recount there? Isn't that odd? Because the certification period had not passed yet.
not
right?
passed yet. That's right.
So what was the deal there?
What the court said was that it was just not clear that a recount was going to give the kind of certainty that the country needed to have at that point. That it was so few votes. The spread was, so marginal, and it was throwing the country into so much chaos that the court just felt that allowing the recount to continue was bad for the country and wouldn't necessarily provide more reliable results. But as you know, that Bush v. Gore was a hugely controversial decision. There were still very angry and bruised feelings about it, that perhaps the court should not have been intervening like this. And remember, Deb, there is another mechanism, because the Supreme Court did not have to step in. The Constitution provides that if we get to the end of our process and we still don't have a president, it can be thrown to the House of Representatives. And the House can vote, and each state only gets one vote, can vote on the next president. So there are other mechanisms, there are some belts and suspenders here in our constitutional system to make sure that we have a succession of power. But invoking those mechanisms, having to go to them, will surely be, something that we should only do as a last-ditch effort to have a clear and peaceful succession. It's something that we don't want to do lightly, because it's one more thing that takes us out of our traditions and what we know, and that will cast doubt on the legitimacy of the ultimate winner, whoever that is.
So I went and I looked at the 12th Amendment, and it kind of made me want to poke my eyes out. I don't casually read the amendments usually, and I went and I looked at the 12th Amendment, and unlike much of the Constitution and many of the amendments, it's not this succinct paragraph, right? It's this incredibly dense.
Yeah, we're right here.
Right. So in fact, what I had to do is go in there and copy it into a Word document and put spaces between each line, just so that I could actually read it without my eyes crossing, right? It's crazy complicated. And one of the questions, and for those of you who don't know, the 12th Amendment is the thing that says that you know, if the election is unclear, there are these 14 other mechanisms that you can, it's not really 14, but there are these other mechanisms that
Right.
we can use to decide the election, none of which, by the way, is the Supreme Court, right?
Right. So this has, and the other thing is, this has never been invoked. We have never had to go to this.
Right.
So
And
it is a really, sort of extraordinary, would be an extraordinary moment that we had to. It is instructive that the framers, though, understood, though this was ratified a little bit later, in 1804.
Didn't this have to do with the Jefferson
Right,
Burr?
exactly. But understood that we could end up in a crisis because
Right.
we did not have, the belts and suspenders already in our Constitution that we needed to make sure that there was always a successor.
Right. So, so coming back to, so there are, the way normal elections work, right? We vote. The state counts the votes. The state certifies the votes. If the vote is extremely close, there can be a recount. And by extremely close, it's like under 0.5% difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? And then one way or another, the states are required by December 8th to have certified the election. But as you point out, in 2000, the powers that be decided that they didn't want to wait that long because chaos. Like, that sounds cute now because now we understand what chaos looks like a little better. So,
and it's a very real possibility is all I am saying. People have focused on, will Donald Trump leave power peacefully? Or will he be, barricade himself in the White House and refuse to leave? And then there was a great discussion a few weeks ago about what role would the military play? Would the military come and remove him? And military leaders said, no, we wouldn't. We're not getting involved in this. But I don't think that's really the realistic scenario. The realistic scenario is that we just do not know for some time who has won the election, and that uncertainty and our efforts to sort out to resolve that uncertainty may throw the country into chaos. And one of the worries is that, we're already kind of teetering on the brink, and how is that going to appear on election day itself? I mean, the president had threatened to send federal agents or federal troops to polling places. That is not legal. It is, for the states to administer the election. It is not up to the president. And the feds have no business coming to polling places unless their assistance is requested. But one of the worries is that if there are physical confrontations in the streets, if there were clashes, then the federal government may have more of a basis for saying, hey, we're just coming in to keep the peace. So I think it's very important that there not be any pretext for federal intervention above and beyond the rationale or the reasons why we might otherwise need that intervention.
So I think one of the key messages here for anyone who's listening right now is vote as soon as you can, right? So most states have various kinds of early voting, absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, which are in effect the same thing, except the only difference between an absentee ballot and a mail-in ballot is you don't have to explain why you're out of town. They are processed and managed in exactly the same way. They are equally secure, everything else. So if you want to vote absentee, vote absentee. If you want to avoid the post office, you can drop it off at an election center, right? So City Hall usually, or they're often your county seat. You can look that up on your state's website. and then there's also early voting in a lot of places where you can just go to an election center and vote early.
And there have been thousands of ballots already cast because a number of the states have already started early voting. So, it is a huge, unwieldy machinery, huge unwieldy process to get so many individuals to vote, get the results, get the tallies, make sure they're reliable, report them, do a recount if needed. It is a huge
so that issue of reliability, I know that there are ways to audit results. I expect that's going to come into play a lot. That people are going to that allegations will be made. And if someone makes allegations that an election isn't kosher, and that's, if someone will almost certainly make allegations of this nature, how do you audit an election? How do states demonstrate that the results of their count are correct?
Yeah, well, I can't, there are people, this is a very, very technical subject. And there are people who are much more expert than I am on that, and it'll differ in every state. I mean, just remember that some states have purely electronic balloting, some have all paper balloting, some have a mixture, electronic with paper backup. And so there are a variety of methods, and one needs to look state by state. I will tell you that there's a wonderful map on the website of an organization called Verified Voting that has a state by state guide to this. So I think that it depends an enormous amount on the state's rules that we're talking about. What is even possible, and so it's important to know what those rules are. Now, one thing I want to highlight, however, is on election day, there is another serious risk, which has nothing to do with absentee ballots. It has to do with in-person voting. In addition to people being afraid of coronavirus, there could be disinformation that circulates to discourage people from going to the polls.
Right.
So, for example, you could hear a news report of an active shooter at a polling place. And that could basically shut down that polling place because there might not be any way to make sure it's perfectly secure. So we may be hearing a lot of disinformation designed to suppress the voter turnout, which is what a lot of this is geared towards. The post office, lots of the other actions, they do not want high voter turnout, especially from urban areas where the crowd is most likely to be Democratic.
Right. So again, the way to avoid getting caught up in that is voting as soon as you can. And I just want to say that if anyone is unsure in any way, most people who vote are used to going to the polls and voting on election day, but there are all of these other ways to vote early. And if you aren't sure how that works for you, you can go to iwillvote.com or vote.org, and they'll ask you to type in where you live, and they'll direct you to your state or jurisdictions or county's elections office with all of the information and that on where to vote, how to vote, what the dates are, when you can start voting, all of that stuff. And I would recommend if you do not already have that knowledge, get that knowledge, vote as soon as you can. And I'm probably going to say that 100 times because I really actually think that's the solution to the problem. But so there are two issues that I think we haven't really talked about yet that I think really matter. One is that issue of disinformation. Right. There is already a tremendous amount of disinformation out there. And even this talk of, election day is going to be terrible. Some of it is meant to gin up chaos, and some of it is meant to psych you out so that you think you have no control over the process.
Right. And
So
so one of the worries is that, we talked before about Russia. Russia interfered very heavily in the 2016 election. They interfered in the midterms as well in 2018, though not as heavily perhaps as some had expected. They could certainly have done more. And now there's every reason to think they are interfering again.
so when we talk about interfering,
So there are different forms of interference. So one
right,
way is just the social media posts, the sort of fake posts of a political nature designed to have an impact. And there were all sorts of extraordinary posts that went on, or bots, advertisements that are automatically duplicated. There were crazy attacks on, Hillary Clinton in the back of a pizza parlor was running a sex ring, all of that stuff that came from Russian disinformation to the best of our knowledge. And, is designed to make the American population more polarized so that they
yeah.
were also willing to stoke up, gin up Black Lives Matter movements, and
As I understand it, the Russians are really talented at coming into Facebook pages or groups and sort of arguing both sides of the issue to make it more and more and more emotional.
Right, exactly. Well, more emotional, but also more polarized. That's
Right.
the thing. So that you've got, you take the far left and you put a lot of energy and money into the far left and into disinformation efforts that push that group or those groups even further to the left. And then you do the same thing with the right, and surely in a very fertile environment for us, but nevertheless, it has an impact and has the effect of skewing yet further the two ends of the American political spectrum, and making them more and more apart from one another. I mean, for example, I will give you, the question is who is supporting Kanye West for running? Very interesting report came out on MSNBC suggesting that, in fact, the Trump administration is assisting Kanye West to run, and see it as a benefit because he's a third party. He can help split the Democratic vote. That's going on in Wisconsin, where he is running. And, the question is who is backing that effort, but that's exactly the sort of thing that the Russians would want to support to try to polarize the American public as much as possible.
So my team, we've been talking about this issue a lot, and the fact that, most people think that disinformation is like a big meme with a weird, scary thing on it. And the fact of it is that some disinformation is like that, but a lot of disinformation, it's very hard to tell the difference. And most people will get fooled at least some of the time.
Well, for example,
fact,
to your point, Deb, in addition to disinformation of a political nature, what we are seeing now is disinformation about coronavirus.
right.
So we are seeing an intentional interference on the part of the Russian government to spread conspiracy theories and to confuse people about the virus.
So what we've been saying is, if especially over the next few weeks, if you see something online that makes you angry or gives you that, aha, I knew it feeling, that's when you should stop. Maybe it's true, but disinformation is designed to elicit that exact response.
Right.
And so if you feel yourself responding to information that you see, that's when you should stop and do what you can to verify it, either with mainstream media or go to original sources, or if it's about coronavirus, go look at the World Health Organization or the CDC, that sort of thing.
Well, that's exactly right. And especially the sort of conspiracy theories, which, studies show people really fall for at very high rates.
They're
And
very sophisticated and
they're
they're
very, very,
very manipulative.
that's right. That is absolutely true. And then when you add to that, at least in 2016, the hacking of the DNC and the posting of those hacks and Hillary's emails on WikiLeaks. These are a variety of techniques that the hacking is very different from the disinformation. And there were just plain attacks or readiness attacks, such as man in the middle accounts, where a virus is sent into a home network or into a series of home networks. And lies sleeping there and can be activated at any point, but is not otherwise engaged.
So, so there are, what we've learned is that, so the election will occur, vote early. There will likely be a period of uncertainty as the legitimate process of counting goes on. There may be an extended period of uncertainty as the campaigns challenge the results or make their allegations or whatever's going to happen. And there are several different ways that could go, whether it happens within the states, whether it happens in the courts, or whether it happens in Congress, right?
That's right. There are a lot of different ways that chaos around the election could end up getting resolved or not, hopefully resolved.
But one of the key things is this whole thread of disinformation that's going to happen is designed to, number one, make us feel powerless. Number two, depress the vote, so you won't want to vote. Number three, create chaos and confusion and fear and panic, right?
That's right. That's right. And again, the Russians repeatedly see that as to their benefit. Why they do is not entirely clear, but it does
make good guesses there.
Vacuum that allows a sort of strong man to step into. And very, very great worries on election day, given what President Donald Trump said in the debate, sort of hinting to the Proud Boys, stand back and stand ready. So, that a lot of people interpreted that as a kind of dog whistle to the right. And there's a lot of worry about, what could happen on election day as a result.
Right. So given that, again, it kind of feels like what we should all be doing is, first of all, vote as soon as you can in your state or jurisdiction, as soon as you can. Number two, don't let yourself get taken in by the disinformation. In other words, verify everything, whether it makes you feel mad or it makes you feel vindicated or it makes you feel frightened. I think, don't freak out is kind of the message until there's an actual reason to freak out, right?
And I think also I would add as a recommendation to your viewers to, if possible, vote in person. If you have a compromised immune system, you're very, very concerned about going to a polling place, then don't do it. But for most everybody else, if you are wearing a mask and you're washing your hands and making sure to social distance from people, not coming within 6 feet, and you don't have too long lines, you should be okay to go to a polling place in person. But
and
if
again,
you know that
especially
you're not,
go before election day.
If you can, yeah. And if you do not feel comfortable doing that, then hurry, hurry, hurry to request your mail-in ballot or your absentee ballot. And then finally, if you do use a mail-in ballot or an absentee ballot, well, an absentee, you wouldn't be able to do it, but if you do use a mail-in ballot, consider very much dropping it off at a governmental election drop box rather than using the US mails.
Right. Okay. What, so as voters, we have the power and the right to vote, obviously. Are there other powers that citizens have? So who can, if these elections are contested, if there's confusion, if there's debate, who has grounds to intervene with the states, the courts, or the Congress? Like, who actually figures out which way those go?
It would depend very much what we're talking about, but there might be you know, taxpayer suits depending on what happens. But most likely it would be the candidates. So the candidates would be filing, you know, if Joe Biden, for example, believes that there has been voter suppression or that there have been irregularities in the counting of the vote or in the assignment of electors or anything that you know, the Biden camp believes may have illegally deprived him of a chance to become president, then there could be litigation, and the same the other way around. Donald Trump, you know, either candidate can bring an action, which is what happened in 2000. But what should ordinary citizens do is more to the point, and you asked before, what rights do ordinary citizens have? Well, you know, the most important right that ordinary citizens have, that, you know, two most important rights in this situation. Number one, the right to vote. You know, every American over the age of 18 and up, has the right to vote, and that is a sacred right. Voter, under the best of circumstances, without all of these factors, voter turnout is appallingly low. Higher in a year where there's a general election. In the off years, the turnout is, you know, just unbelievably low. If you compare us with other countries, some countries where voting is not just a right, it is a duty, and you have to vote. You know, you can get fined for not voting. That is one way to make sure that you are preserving and, you know, that your representatives, your elected representatives, represent the will of the people. But, you know, the most important thing that you can do is get out there and actually vote, make sure that your vote is going to count. And then, of course, the other very important right that you have is a right of free speech, of free expression, a right to write anything you want, and you know, provided that you are not violating some other law, and to make your voices heard about what your views are as a citizen and what your priorities are for the country. And all of that is called civic engagement. It's a very, very important part of our democracy, and we cannot have a democracy without real civic engagement.
What do you mean by civic engagement?
I mean, making sure that you are an informed citizen, that you know what's going on in the world, and that you then go and vote your conscience to the best of your ability, and that you speak up. And you have a right to speak up in many different forms, and one way in which you have a right to speak up is to attend a demonstration, for example. While there may be great fear right now around that, given the violence that has occurred in Portland, if you are not being violent, as most of the demonstrations have been peaceful demonstrations, You absolutely have a right to be out there in the streets. And we do know over time that, in fact, those sort of grassroots work and having people in the streets expressing their views does tend to have an impact. There is no question that it had at other points in our history during the Vietnam War. There's no question that our decision to pull out of the Vietnam War was affected by peaceful protests that occurred, you know, to reject our military engagement in Vietnam. So those are the primary rights that we have: rights of free expression and rights of civic engagement.
So,
I think I will have
when
to
you're,
wrap it up for today. You know, is there a last question that I can answer to
yeah,
tie it all together for you?
so when you are, have taken off your professor hat for the day, and
Yes.
you've taken off your lawyer, attorney hat for the day, and you are, you know, have had your dinner, and you are settling into your evening, which probably happens quite late for you, I'm sure, but yeah, it's later and later for me these days too. What goes through your mind? What are you going to do? What do you tell your friends to do? What is the conversation, and how do you try to take it from this very frightening place to a place where we know what to expect and we know what to be wary of?
Well, personally, I will say I intend to vote in person. I have confidence in my, my state's election board that they are going to take precautions with regard to the virus. I also have confidence that I know how to take precautions for myself. I will wear a mask for sure, and I will I carry hand sanitizer wherever I go. And after I touch here in Pennsylvania, which may be a very contested state, yeah, we do vote electronically. There are a lot of complications with Pennsylvania's balloting, but at any rate, after I touch that electronic board, I will Purell my hands. And I will feel perfectly comfortable having gone in person. I hope that it will be like every other year where there has been no difficulty voting in person, and I'll be very proud to exercise my civic right to engage in our democracy. And very happy that my daughter, who was away for college for the first time, will be exercising her right. She will be voting absentee, and I have every faith that that absentee ballot, if she can actually get one, and I will say she's been having a hard time getting her ballot, will arrive safely, but it has to happen very soon, or we can't be sure. So I think the safest way to vote, to make sure that your vote is counted, is to vote in person.
Right. On that note, my son is just a couple of years ahead of your child, and my son's senior high school history teacher had every single one of her students register to vote, which is great. But there are a lot of 18-year-olds who are not registered. If you know one, make sure they're registered.
And that's a really big issue right now this year, Deb, because a lot of students are registered where they go to college. Right. And they are sitting at home in their parents' houses because of the pandemic and the fact that their college is online instead of in person. So it's very important that they not, give up on being able to vote, because they can vote absentee from their parents' home, or they may be able to re-register. Registration has closed in some states, but they should absolutely look into how they can make sure to vote and not decide it's just too much trouble and not to do it, because this is going to be a historic election, and it is really critical for the legitimacy, whoever the president is, and Donald Trump should want this every bit as much as Joe Biden, that the next president of the United States is elected by the largest possible turnout of voters in the country so that
Absolutely.
we know that the next president really represents the will of the people. That is absolutely critical. And when you get, 40%, 30% of the population voting instead of 70%, then we do not know what that silent majority really wants in a president. So we need to get the vote out, whoever you are voting for.
Absolutely. Getting the vote out. If you are the parent or friend of a college student, give them a little grief. Make sure that they have their ballot. My kid, he was like, well, I don't know where to get a stamp. His first year voting, I actually sent him enough stamps so that his entire dorm could put a stamp on their ballot if they so desired. So vote, stay informed, and don't accept that anything you see is true until you have it verified by a very reliable source.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Deb, for having me today.
Thank you so much for bringing your expertise. Thank you. It is empowering to actually understand the truth of what's going on, and your expertise is super valuable. So thank you so very much for being here. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks everyone for joining us.